The scent of freshly cut grass, pine needles, and a faint, almost imperceptible hint of antiseptic was the aroma of Patriots Landing. It was an exclusive, gated retirement community for military veterans and their families, a place of manicured perfection and fiercely guarded tranquility. I had moved there, not because of my own service. My life had been spent in the quieter, dustier halls of academia, but for my best and oldest friend, retired Army Colonel Frank Miller. We had been friends since we were boys, our lives diverging after high school when he went to West Point and I went to study history. He had chased enemies across the world. I had chased footnotes through archives. Now, at the end of our lives, our paths had converged again. Frank was fighting his final battle, with a cancer that was as relentless as any enemy he had faced on the battlefield. And I had moved here to be with him, to be his witness and his support in his final campaign. I was a quiet man, a recently retired professor of military history, a widower whose own wife had passed a few years prior. My small, tidy home was filled with books, maps, and the quiet contentment of a life spent in study. My routine was simple. I'd spend my mornings writing, and my afternoons with Frank, reading to him, helping him organize his vast collection of military memorabilia, or just sitting in silence, the comfortable, easy silence that only a lifetime of friendship can build. My peaceful, purposeful existence was first disrupted by Eleanor Vance, the president of the Patriots Landing Homeowners Association. She was a formidable woman in her late 60s, the widow of a high-ranking naval officer, a fact she mentioned with the frequency of a nervous tic. She ruled the community with an iron fist and a 300-page book of bylaws. Her power was absolute, her judgment swift and unforgiving. She appeared on my doorstep a week after I moved in, not with a welcoming pie, but with a clipboard and an expression of deep suspicion. "Mr. Morgan," she began, foregoing any pleasantries. Her voice was crisp and authoritative, accustomed to unquestioning obedience. "I am Eleanor Vance. I am the president of the board. I have been reviewing your residency application. It is unusual." "Unusual?" I asked, a bit taken aback. "How so?" "This is a community for veterans," she stated, her eyes scanning me as if looking for a hidden uniform. "Your application lists your profession as historian. While we have a deep respect for those who chronicle the achievements of our brave men and women, you are not, yourself, a veteran." "That's correct," I said. "I'm here as the guest and designated caregiver for Colonel Frank Miller in Lot 117. It was all approved by the board before I moved in." It was, she conceded, a hint of annoyance in her voice. "A decision made before I assumed the presidency. I can assure you, the standards for such arrangements are much stricter now. We are a community of warriors, Mr. Morgan, not academics. We have a certain standard to uphold." The condescension in her voice was as thick as armor plating. She was making it clear that, in her eyes, I was an outsider, a lesser being who had slipped through the gates by a technicality. "I will do my best to uphold your standards, Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "See that you do," she said, her eyes already cataloging the exterior of my home for any imperfections. "Our rules are not suggestions. They are the bedrock of our community's prestige and order. You will find that non-compliance has consequences." She turned and marched back to her golf cart, leaving me with the distinct feeling that I had just been inspected by a hostile commanding officer. I was not a resident to her. I was a probationary anomaly, a civilian interloper in her uniformed world. And she was going to be watching my every move, waiting for me to fail. The first official salvo from Eleanor Vance arrived a week after our initial, chilly encounter. It was a formal notice of violation, printed on thick, embossed letterhead that felt more appropriate for a legal summons than a neighborly dispute. The subject of her complaint was a simple, elegant wreath of dried hydrangeas that I had hung on my front door. According to the notice, the wreath was in violation of Bylaw 114, which stipulated that all seasonal door adornments must be from a pre-approved list of designs to ensure a harmonious and dignified aesthetic throughout the community. My wreath, a gift from a former graduate student, was not on the list. I was instructed to remove it within 24 hours or face a $50 fine. I stared at the letter, a sense of weary disbelief washing over me. In my academic career, I had navigated the treacherous politics of university departments, debated tenured professors, and supervised doctoral dissertations of mind-numbing complexity. And now, my first formal challenge as a retiree was a dispute over a wreath. I spent most of my days with Frank. His health was declining rapidly, and his home, once a place of military precision, had begun to show signs of neglect. I tried to help where I could, tending to his small garden, organizing his papers, ensuring he was comfortable. The last thing I wanted was to cause him any additional stress by starting a war with the HOA. So, with a heavy heart, I took the wreath down. My compliance, however, was not seen as a gesture of peace. It was seen as a capitulation. A week later, a new notice arrived. This one was for a small, teak garden bench that sat under a large oak tree in my front yard. It was where Frank and I would sometimes sit in the afternoons, when he was feeling strong enough. The bench, according to Eleanor, was of an unapproved model and material. The community bylaws, she wrote, required all outdoor seating to be of a specific, white-painted, cast-iron design to maintain a uniform, parade ground appearance. I called one of my former colleagues from the university, a fellow historian named David, to vent my frustration. "You won't believe this, David," I said. "I'm being fined because my bench isn't made of iron." David laughed. "Welcome to the wonderful world of homeowners associations. Arthur, it's a form of government with no constitution and no due process. A historian's worst nightmare. You have no idea," I muttered. "I'm currently engaged in a low-intensity conflict with a local warlord who communicates exclusively through passive-aggressive decrees." I looked at the bench, a symbol of my friendship with Frank, now a source of bureaucratic strife. Again, I chose to comply. I moved the bench to my back patio, out of sight from the street. My days were increasingly focused on Frank. He was a man who had faced death many times in the jungles of Vietnam. But this new, internal enemy was one he could not fight. His courage, however, remained intact. He spent his good hours telling me stories, not of battle, but of the men he had served with, the bonds they had forged. I began to record our conversations, to help him organize his letters and commendations, to create a record of his life of service. It was the work of a historian, but it was also the work of a friend. One afternoon, as we were going through his old papers, I found a small, framed photograph of Frank with a young boy in a crisp military school uniform. "That's my boy," Frank said, his voice a weak, raspy whisper. "That's David." "I've never met him," I said. "Not many have," Frank said with a sad smile. "He's busy. Always on the move. Important work." "What does he do?" I asked. Frank's eyes grew distant. "He's a soldier. A real one. Not like me. I was just a staff officer, a logistician. David. He's the tip of the spear. High up. Very high up. He seemed to fade after that, the effort of the memory too much for him. But the image of the serious-faced boy in the uniform, and Frank's description of the powerful, distant man he had become, stuck with me. It was a part of my friend's life that I had never known. The following week, Eleanor found her next target. It was not my property, but Frank's. He had a small, simple flagpole in his front yard, a gift from his old unit, from which a pristine American flag flew every day. Eleanor, on one of her ceaseless patrols, had apparently measured it. A new notice arrived, addressed to Frank, but which I opened at his request. The flagpole, the letter stated, was 1 inch taller than the maximum height of 10 feet, allowed by the bylaws. It was a violation and had to be remediated. Frank was too ill to even comprehend the letter. I was incensed. To harass a dying, decorated colonel over a single inch on his flagpole was an act of such profound disrespect it bordered on the profane. I wrote a formal, carefully worded letter back to the board, explaining that Colonel Miller was in his final days, and that I would see to the flagpole's remediation at an appropriate time after his passing. I asked, in the name of common decency, that they leave him in peace. The next day, I had to take Frank to the hospital for a brief stay. When I returned to his house that evening, I found that the remediation had already been taken care of. Someone from the HOA's maintenance crew, undoubtedly on Eleanor's orders, had come with a hacksaw. They had sawed the top inch off the metal flagpole, leaving a jagged, ugly scar on the metal and damaging the pulley mechanism. The flag now hung askew, a tattered, sad-looking thing. It was a deniable act of vandalism, disguised as bylaw enforcement. But it was also a symbolic desecration, a petty, vicious act of disrespect to a dying soldier. I stood there in the twilight, looking at the mutilated flagpole, and I felt the last of my desire for peaceful compliance burn away. This was no longer about rules. This was about honor. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this was a battle I could not lose. The desecration of Frank's flagpole was a clear escalation, a move from bureaucratic harassment to a direct and personal insult. I knew then that Eleanor Vance was not just a stickler for rules. She was a bully who derived pleasure from the exercise of her petty power, especially over those she perceived as weak. Her new target was no longer just me, the civilian interloper, but the legacy of my dying friend. My response was not one of anger, but of cold, academic precision. I documented the damage with a historian's eye for detail. I took high-resolution photographs of the jagged metal, the damaged pulley, the off-kilter flag. I wrote a formal letter of complaint to the HOA board, a letter that was less a complaint and more a legal brief. I did not just cite the HOA's own bylaws on property damage. I cited the United States Flag Code regarding the proper and respectful display of the national flag. I detailed the symbolic disrespect shown to a decorated combat veteran in his final days. My language was not emotional. It was precise, formal, and steeped in the traditions of military honor and legal precedent. The letter had no effect. I received no apology, no response. It was simply ignored. Eleanor, meanwhile, escalated her campaign of social isolation and slander. Having established me as a non-veteran outsider, she now began to paint me as a parasite, a mooch taking advantage of a sick old man. She used her monthly President's Message in the Patriots Landing newsletter to launch her attack. In a community as tight-knit as ours, she wrote, we must always be vigilant in protecting our most vulnerable members. It has come to the board's attention that our beloved Colonel Frank Miller, in his time of illness, has become increasingly isolated. We must ensure that our dear friend is not being unduly influenced by outsiders with unclear motives, who may not have his best interests at heart. It is the duty of our community of warriors to look after our own. The insinuation was as subtle as a punch to the gut. I was the outsider with unclear motives. I was the one isolating Frank, the one who didn't have his best interests at heart. The truth that I was his closest friend, his chosen caregiver, the one person he trusted implicitly, was irrelevant. Eleanor was creating a new, more sinister narrative. The whispers at the community clubhouse grew louder. I was no longer just the professor. I was the colonel's strange friend, the one who was always over there. Residents who had once been friendly now looked at me with suspicion. They saw me not as a friend helping a dying man, but as a vulture circling a carcass. The isolation was a heavy burden, but my focus remained on Frank. His time was growing short. He was now in hospice care, receiving treatment in his own home. He was lucid only for brief periods, and during those moments, we would continue our work, organizing his life's papers. One afternoon, we came across the photo of his son, David, again. "He's a good boy," Frank whispered, his voice thin as paper. "A good man. Important man." He fumbled with a small, locked metal box on his bedside table. "My will. Power of attorney. It's all in there. David has the key. He's the executor. He'll know what to do." Frank's hand fell away, his eyes closing with exhaustion. The mention of his son, the mysterious, powerful figure who held the keys to his father's final wishes, seemed to be a source of both pride and sorrow for him. A few days later, Eleanor made her most audacious and cruel move yet. She weaponized an agency of the state, twisting its noble purpose into a tool of harassment. She called Adult Protective Services. I was sitting with Frank, reading him a passage from one of his favorite history books, when the doorbell rang. It was a social worker from APS, a pleasant but firm woman who explained that she was there to investigate a report of elder abuse. The report, she explained, came from a concerned neighbor and alleged that Colonel Miller was being improperly cared for, isolated from his friends and community, and was being financially exploited by his caregiver. I felt a surge of rage so intense it made my vision swim. To be accused of exploiting the man I loved like a brother, to have our final, precious days together violated by this baseless, malicious accusation, it was an act of profound evil. But I pushed the rage down. I was calm. I was professional. I was the historian, the man of facts and evidence. I invited the social worker in. I calmly and authoritatively presented her with the legal and medical reality of the situation. I showed her Frank's signed and notarized living will. I showed her the durable power of attorney, which was assigned not to me, but to his son, Colonel David Miller. I showed her the detailed records from the hospice agency, the daily logs from the nurses, the doctor's reports. I presented an airtight, documented case that Frank was receiving the best possible care, in accordance with his own express wishes. The social worker was a professional. She saw the truth immediately. She was polite enough to ask Frank a few gentle questions during a moment of lucidity, and he confirmed that I was there at his request, that I was his best damn friend in the world. As she was leaving, the social worker turned to me, her face a mask of apology and disgust. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "I am so sorry for this intrusion. This is a gross misuse of our services. The report was clearly filed in bad faith, and I will be noting it as such. This is a form of harassment. and I will be filing my own report with my superiors about the complainant." After she left, I sat by Frank's bedside, the silence in the room thick with the ugliness of what had just happened. Eleanor had failed again, but her failure had come at a terrible cost, violating the sanctity of a dying man's home. She had tried to paint me as a criminal, as an abuser, in her desperate, pathological need to control everything. She had sacrificed every last shred of human decency. Colonel Frank Miller passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 days after the visit from Adult Protective Services. His daughter, a kind woman who lived several states away, flew in immediately. I met her at the airport, and together, we began the sad, methodical work of planning his final farewell. Frank's wishes were simple. He wanted a small, dignified service at the Patriots Landing Community Chapel, a place he had found comfort in during his illness. He wanted a simple procession from the chapel to the front gate, where the hearse would then take him to be buried with his wife at the National Cemetery. He had also given me a short list of names, a few of his old Army buddies from his Vietnam days, men who were not residents of Patriots Landing, whom he wanted to be invited to the service. I took it upon myself, as a final act of service to my friend, to coordinate the arrangements with the community. I went to the HOA office to book the chapel and to inform them of the planned procession. I was met by Eleanor Vance. She was wearing black, but her expression was not one of mourning. It was one of brisk, officious control. "Arthur," she said, not bothering with condolences, "I have been informed of your plans, and I am afraid they are not in compliance with community regulations." She slid a piece of paper across the desk at me. It was a single sheet, titled Protocol for On-Site Memorial Services. It was a list of cold, bureaucratic rules. "As you know," she began, her voice devoid of all empathy, "Patriots Landing is home to many high-profile and important individuals who value their privacy and security. We cannot have a disruptive, somber event interfering with the daily lives of our residents." I looked at the list. It stipulated that all memorial services were limited to 1 hour. It dictated the exact route the procession must take, not the main, dignified boulevard, but a series of back service roads. And then I saw the final, most monstrous rule. Attendance at all on-site events is strictly limited to residents and their pre-approved, registered family members, she said, her eyes cold and hard. "There will be no unapproved guests. The men on your friend's little list are not residents. They are not family. They will not be admitted past the front gate. Our security has been given a list. Only residents will be allowed to attend the service." I stared at her, my blood running cold. She was telling me that the men who had fought alongside Frank, the men who had bled with him in the jungle, were not welcome to honor him at his own funeral. "Beatrice," I said, my voice low and shaking with a rage I could barely control, "this is a funeral, not a community barbecue. Those men are his brothers in arms. They have every right to be here." "They have no rights here," she snapped. "This is a private community. We have rules. Your friend's death does not give you, or anyone else, the right to break those rules and turn this solemn place into a circus." She stood up, the audience clearly over. "You will adhere to this protocol. Arthur, the service will be short, the procession will be discreet, and the guest list will be residents only. If you attempt to violate these terms, I will have our security shut the entire event down. Do not disrespect this community, and do not disrespect your friend's memory by causing a scene." She had turned my grief into a weapon against me. She was threatening to desecrate Frank's final farewell, to deny him his last wish of being honored by his comrades, all in the name of her own twisted, pathological need for control. I walked out of her office into the bright sunshine, but all I felt was a cold, dark chill. The final line had been crossed. This was no longer about me. This was about honoring my friend. And I would not, under any circumstances, allow this woman to have the final word. The day of the funeral was a crisp, clear autumn day. The sky a brilliant, heartless blue. The small community chapel was filled with the residents of Patriots Landing, their faces a mixture of genuine sadness and quiet respect. Frank had been a beloved figure in the community, a man of quiet dignity and courage. The air in the chapel was thick with a sense of solemnity and loss, a stark contrast to the ugly, bureaucratic battle that had been waged over this very service. As a final act of friendship, I was serving as an usher, standing just outside the chapel doors, greeting the residents as they arrived. I wore a simple, dark suit, my heart a heavy, aching stone in my chest. I felt a profound sense of failure. I had followed the rules. I had called Frank's army buddies and, with a voice choked with shame, explained the situation. They had been gracious, of course, telling me they would pay their respects at the National Cemetery. But I knew they were hurt, and I knew that Frank would have been devastated. Just as the service was about to begin, a long, black, official-looking sedan pulled up to the main gate of Patriots Landing. I could see the gate from the chapel steps. Two of Eleanor's uniformed Patriot security guards stepped out to intercept the vehicle. The back door of the sedan opened, and a man was helped out. He was an old man, frail and thin, his body stooped with age. He was in a wheelchair, and an oxygen tank was strapped to the back. But he wore a crisply pressed VFW cap, and on the lapel of his blazer was a Purple Heart ribbon. It was Sergeant First Class Daniel McCabe, one of the men from Frank's list. He had come anyway, determined to honor his friend. I saw Eleanor, clipboard in hand, march from her position near the chapel down to the front gate. She was a storm cloud of officious fury. I saw her check her list. I saw her shake her head. I saw her say something to the guards, who then moved to physically block the old man's wheelchair from passing through the gate. I couldn't stand it. I left my post and walked quickly down the long, tree-lined boulevard toward the gate. "Eleanor," I called out, my voice louder than I intended. "What are you doing?" She turned to me, her face a mask of cold triumph. "I am enforcing the rules. Arthur, he is not on the resident list. He will not be admitted. For God's sake. Woman." "Look at him," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "That is Sergeant McCabe. He served with Frank in Vietnam. He earned a Purple Heart dragging 3 wounded men to safety. He has come here to say goodbye to his friend. You must let him in." "The rules are the rules," she said, her voice like ice. "He is a security risk. He is not welcome." Sergeant McCabe looked on, his face a mask of confusion and deep, profound hurt. To be turned away from the funeral of a man he had called a brother, it was a final, cruel wound. At that moment, a new sound pierced the quiet, somber atmosphere. It was the sound of sirens, but not the familiar wail of a police car. It was the sharp, urgent shriek of a full, official motorcade. 2 state trooper cruisers, their lights flashing, screamed to a halt at the front gate, blocking all traffic. They were followed by 4 massive black Chevrolet Suburbans with tinted windows and government plates. The motorcade came to a stop with a precision and authority that was breathtaking. State troopers leaped out of their cars, their movements crisp and professional, and began to secure the area. The back door of the lead SUV opened. A man in a flawlessly crisp, dark green army class, a dress uniform, stepped out. He was tall and powerful. with a face that seemed to have been carved from granite. On his shoulders, gleaming in the bright autumn sun, were 4 silver stars. He was a full general of the United States Army. He was General David Miller, Frank's son. He took in the entire scene in a single, sweeping glance: the heartbroken old soldier in the wheelchair, the belligerent HOA president with her clipboard, the 2 fake cops physically blocking the entrance, the grieving friend pleading for decency. His handsome, stone-carved face became a mask of cold, controlled, and absolutely terrifying fury. He strode to the gate. His aide, a full colonel, moved to intercept a stunned and confused Eleanor. "Ma'am," the colonel said, his voice quiet, but carrying the unassailable weight of command. "You are interfering with the official funeral procession of a United States Army officer. You will step aside. Now." General Miller ignored Eleanor completely, as if she were a piece of insignificant scenery. He walked directly to the old man in the wheelchair. He dropped to one knee, bringing his 4-star rank down to the level of the old, forgotten sergeant. He took the old man's gnarled, liver-spotted hand in his own. "Sergeant McCabe," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he did not try to hide. "I am David Miller. My father spoke of you often. He told me you were the bravest man he ever knew. Thank you for coming to honor him." He stood up, never letting go of the sergeant's hand. "You are an honored guest here. Please, come with me." He personally began to wheel Sergeant McCabe's chair through the gate. Then he stopped and turned to the lead state trooper. "Captain," he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion. A flat, hard instrument of command. "This woman," he pointed at the now ashen-faced Eleanor, "and her security staff, have willfully obstructed a military funeral. They have unlawfully denied access to a decorated combat veteran. I want their names, and I want the name of the security company they work for. My staff will be in direct contact with the district attorney's office, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the state licensing board. This is now a federal matter." He then looked past Eleanor, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of residents who had gathered to watch the spectacle. And then, his eyes found me. He gave me a single, slow nod, a look of profound gratitude and shared grief. In that moment, the entire petty world of the Sovereign Lakes HOA, with its rules and its resentments, was washed away by a tide of real power, real honor, and real, unwavering loyalty. The funeral of Colonel Frank Miller proceeded not as the sterile, one-hour event dictated by Eleanor Vance, but as the full, dignified military ceremony it was meant to be. General David Miller, in his capacity as next of kin and as a 4-star officer, took command. The service was beautiful and heartbreaking. A military honor guard, which had apparently been waiting discreetly outside the gates, was brought in. They performed a flawless flag-folding ceremony, and General Miller presented the flag to his sister with a quiet, solemn dignity that brought tears to every eye. Sergeant McCabe, the old veteran in the wheelchair, was given a place of honor in the front row. Eleanor Vance and her 2 security guards were detained by the state troopers for the duration of the service. They were questioned, their information was taken, and they were informed that they were under investigation for multiple state and federal offenses, including unlawful imprisonment of Sergeant McCabe at the gate and obstruction of a military funeral. The private security company was found to be operating with an expired license and was summarily shut down by the state licensing board the following week. The legal and social fallout for Eleanor was a swift and merciless avalanche. The Miller family, led by the general's formidable legal staff, filed a civil suit against her personally and against the HOA for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The Department of Veterans Affairs launched its own investigation into the community's policies regarding non-resident veterans. Faced with financial ruin and public disgrace, the HOA board immediately demanded Eleanor's resignation and offered a massive settlement to the Miller family. Eleanor, a pariah in the community she had once ruled, sold her home and disappeared. The Sovereign Lakes community was forced into a period of profound self-reflection. The reign of petty rules and obsessive control was over, replaced by a new board that understood that a community of veterans should be defined by honor and mutual respect, not by the color of their door wreaths. A few weeks after the funeral, I was tending to Frank's now empty house, preparing it for sale. A black government sedan pulled into the driveway. General Miller got out, this time in a simple civilian suit. "Arthur," he said, extending a hand. "I came to thank you." "For what?" I asked. "I was just being a friend to your father." "You were more than that," he said, his eyes filled with a deep, sincere gratitude. "You were his guardian. You were his advocate. In his final days, you were his honor guard. My father was a good man, but a quiet one. He would never have fought for himself. Thank you for fighting for him." We stood in silence for a moment, two men from different worlds, bound by our shared love for a quiet, honorable man. "He was very proud of you," I said softly. "He told me you were the tip of the spear." A sad, rare smile touched the general's lips. He always did have a flair for the dramatic. "I'm just a soldier, trying to do my duty." He left a few minutes later, and I was alone again in the quiet house. I had come to Patriot's Landing to find peace, but instead I had found a war. But it was a war I was proud to have fought. I had not only honored my friend's memory, I had, in my own small way, helped to restore a sense of true honor to a community that had lost its way. And in the fulfillment of that final duty to a friend, I had finally found my own quiet peace.